The Geforce 3080 is about 30% faster than the 2080 Ti for 40% less money, but Nvidia stresses that it's not meant to be compared to the 2080 Ti. It is instead a follow-up to the 2080, being released 2 years later and for the same price. In fact, slightly less, since Nvidia's edition of the card doesn't come at a price premium this time around. Unfortunately, since I don't have a 2080, I can't compare it to that. I did some quick calculations and worked out that the 2080 Ti is about 27% faster than the 2080, which would make the 3080 roughly 64% faster than the 2080 in terms of raw 4K performance. That's a good generational leap. In terms of jumps in raw performance, that's almost double the jump from the 1080 to the 2080, and only slightly less than from the Geforce 9080 to the 1080. But I think, in many ways, comparisons to the 2080 Ti are more interesting, because that was the fastest gaming card in the world, and now the 3080 is. Until next week. In terms of frame rates, I didn't even bother testing 1440p. It just does that resolution, probably well over 100 FPS most of the time. I instead went straight to 4K Ultra settings. To summarise, I would say my old 2080 Ti was a 4K capable card, but you had to choose between Ultra settings at 45 FPS or very high at 60ish. The 3080 on the other hand, more often than not attained 60 FPS even on Ultra settings. And in situations where the 2080 Ti would barely scrape 60, the 3080 is now sitting comfortably in the 80s. 4K has gone from being a doable resolution to being one where the 3080 can comfortably handle it, and with power to spare in all but the most demanding of games. I'll talk more about the benchmarks later for those of you who are interested, but for now I'll get on to other topics, because there's a lot more to say about this card than simply talking about raw performance. This is the first time Nvidia has used an 8nm node. Until now they've been on 12nm, which is interesting because AMD were already on 7, which on paper should have given them the advantage, since smaller nodes means they can cram more stuff into the same space. So simply by moving to 8nm, it should give the RTX 3000 series an advantage over the 2000 series, even without anything else being done to them. But it comes with downsides too. More stuff in the same area means that heat is more of a problem, and perhaps to counter this, this version of the 3080 uses Nvidia's new cooling design. As far as fans go, it's pretty cool. It has a fan on one side to suck cool air in, and a fan on the other end to blow it out again. What's surprising is that even on the 3080, their new flagship GPU, the card itself is actually very short. If you get the angle right, you can see that this whole end bit is actually just cooling fins and fans, meaning that the card itself ends well before this point. I found this comparison with the previous generation, and it shows just how much they've shrunk the design down for Ampere. The card itself comes with 10GB of VRAM, which is a strange amount to have, almost as odd as the 11GB found in my older 2080 Ti. The large gap between the 3080's 10GB and the 3090's 24 makes me think that there will be a middle ground option in the future sometime, possibly in the form of a 3080 Ti or similar. But as Nvidia have said, more RAM means more cost, so if this becomes a thing, then expect to pay a premium for the privilege. How much VRAM do you need? 8GB has been the standard high-end amount for a while now, so with the 3080 we're at least seeing it creep past that. But I was surprised to see it only jump by 2 instead of the more rounded 8 or 4GB leaps. In their recent Q&A session, when questioned about the 10GB of VRAM, Nvidia stated that the 3080s intended to give great performance up to 4K resolution with all settings maxed out. This shouldn't be a problem for most people who I suspect are still gaming at lower resolutions like 1440p. But if you're wanting to game at 8K or on several high resolution displays, then perhaps you're better off getting the 3090 instead. They say that the 3080 has surplus performance and RAM for today's titles, so I guess they feel it's a balanced setup and that by the time the RAM is no longer enough, the card's raw performance probably won't be either. The next thing to talk about is the power consumption. This was probably the most surprising thing about this generation for me. I've said how smaller nodes generally help to improve the efficiency, but the power consumption of the 3000 series is still more than the previous generation was. As in, the 3080 consumes more power than the 2080 does, and so on. Again, it's going to be rather approximate, but the 3070 is meant to be about as fast as the 2080 Ti, and it manages it while consuming 12% less power. So there's been an improvement, but perhaps not as much of one as you might think, given the smaller node and the various optimizations that this generation has had. As for how efficient the 3080 is, it depends on what you compare it to. It consumes 28% more power than the 2080 Ti while being 29% faster. In other words, it consumes more power for an equal jump in performance. And compared to the 2080, the 3080 consumes about 50% more power while delivering 64% more performance, which makes it sound better. I know very little about the 3090, but it looks like the 3080 will be the least efficient of the bunch for the level of performance it offers. But again, that's just speculation on my behalf based on the figures seen here. To help power these new cards is a new connection type, which I rather like. You get an adapter which gets the power from two 8-pins and crams it down into a much smaller footprint on the card itself, plus this extra cable gives more room to reach the connector, which is always welcome. Some friendly advice: it's recommended that you use an 8-pin from two different cables coming from your PSU, so don't use two from the same daisy-chained cable, just in case it overloads it or whatever. I'll admit I am a bit paranoid about this sort of stuff. I've had a history of PSUs blowing up on me. I actually have a phobia of using that switch on the back of them because so many have popped or exploded as I've done that. Probably because I do stupid stuff like to daisy-chain PCI cables together in pretty but totally inappropriate ways. And I did it with the 3080 for a while as well, and nothing bad happened. But you never know. Two different cables, and if your PSU doesn't allow for that, then maybe your PSU isn't up to the task in the first place. A 750 watt PSU is recommended for the 3080. So the leap in efficiency over the 2000 series isn't anything special, but the Ampere architecture the 3080 is based on has a number of other improvements over Turing which are worth mentioning, namely the first step towards 8K support. I don't think that many people are considering 8K at the moment, but it's nice to see they're paving the way for it. These 8K improvements comprise of shadowplay recordings and up to 8K quality, but only at 30 FPS. Still, we've come so far. I remember the 600 series was able to record at 1080p 60 FPS and 1440p at 30 FPS. Then when the 900 series came along, it jumped all the way up to 4K 60 FPS. So it's cool that another step has been made, even if it won't be of much use to me because I think 4K at 60 is more useful to me at the moment. There's also support for AV1 decoding. Why should you care about this? It enables high quality videos at incredibly small file sizes, and it's already rolling out on Netflix and YouTube. Problem is, it takes a huge amount of processing power to play. Most processors would struggle with it at 4 or 8K, so being able to offload this task onto GPUs is great news. Over on Nvidia's site, they even say that the next generation of game streaming could involve 1440p 120 FPS videos, which AV1 makes a possibility even on a humble 8 megabits per second connection. So that's why AV1 decoding's cool. And the last 8K related feature is a new DLSS mode. 9x scaling means it's actually rendering at just 1440p, then uses AI to upscale it all the way up to 8K. I know what you're thinking, it's quite a leap to claim an upscaled 1440p image can be 8K, but I can believe it. DLSS has managed amazing things with its 4x scaling, and while its representation of higher resolutions isn't always perfect, when you reach resolutions as high as 8K it doesn't really matter too much at a per pixel level anymore. What I think might happen here is that it'll look clearest after a few frames of the player standing still, but the limitations of this upscaling approach will be more evident during moving shots. It's just that at 8K, nobody's going to notice this when the scene's in motion. You can see a comparison here between 4K native and 8K DLSS, presumably using this new super performance mode, and it looks undeniably and significantly sharper and more detailed. Let's be honest here, few people will have a setup capable of 8K, and fewer still will be in a position where they can analyse it in sufficient depth to know the specifics of what it's capable of. It seems like this feature is being marketed for the 3090 with its 24GB of RAM, so I'll admit I haven't checked it out with the 3080 just yet, but it is something I'm interested in trying. DLSS has also got support for VR and variable resolutions. VR is particularly interesting because it's something where you need high resolutions and frame rates, so DLSS seems like the perfect match for this kind of task. And there is a claim Nvidia made that I'd like to investigate. There was a slide that showed Ampere delivering 1.9 times the performance per watt that Turing could, but this doesn't correlate with the new TDPs and speed increases that we've seen. Instead, what they're saying is, if a Turing card at 100% load can reach, say, 62 FPS in control, then a 3080 limited to that same 62 FPS will draw significantly less power. In other words, at its stated TDP, the 3000 series is faster than the 2000 series. Or, if you limit Ampere to a frame rate that Turing can already hit, then Ampere will be up to 1.9 times more efficient at achieving that frame rate. But you can't have the best of both worlds at the same time. I don't think this is unique to Ampere. I'd expect efficiency improvements at capped frame rates with every new, faster generation of cards. But regardless, I set out to try and replicate this efficiency improvement, just to get a feel for how to obtain it in practice. For this, I ran Nvidia's own benchmarking tool, FrameView, which documents frame rates and the power required to produce each one. As to be expected, the results I got were highly dependent on the resolutions and settings used. Total performance per watt in control, ray tracing on, at 960p upscaled to 1440p using DLSS, looks like it achieves similar to the claimed 1.9 times leap. So it's not like the 3000 series can't be 1.9 times more efficient than the 2000 series, but it would be wrong to assume that they're that much more efficient under normal use. It requires deliberate frame rate capping, something you might expect in, say, a laptop, where you might want it to hit a playable frame rate and graphical quality and then to go no further because it would simply drain the battery to do so. Another example might be if you're playing a game that the 3000 series can run uncapped at, say, 800 FPS. You might decide that's a waste of power, and to instead cap it to your monitor's refresh rate, to still get a playable performance, but to keep your PC cooler, quieter and more efficient instead. The 1.9 times efficiency leap isn't incorrect, but you won't experience it unless you artificially limit the frame rates you're getting. Moving on, there's a feature called Reflex, which cuts down on the latency in certain competitive games. It looks like this is being rolled out to older cards as well, with the 1660 Super shown to benefit from it too. It looks like it's supported on a per game basis, of which Counter-Strike currently isn't one of them. One of the big leaps the next generation of consoles is making is to reduce loading times, and to greatly improve how quickly new parts of the game world can be drawn. RTX I/O appears to be Nvidia's implementation of it for PC. They show comparisons here. While a hard drive could take 38 seconds to load something, a fast SSD could cut that down to just 5, and aided by RTX I/O, that could be reduced down to just 1.5 seconds. So that means no tea breaks between levels, or perhaps just very quick ones. So I don't have much more to say or to show about this for now, but just know that PCs will be getting support for one of the key selling features of the new console generation. And here are the benchmarks that I promised earlier. To summarise the 3080, you have to go back in time to the story leading to this point. The 2000 series was not considered a big leap over the 1000 series. It didn't offer substantially more raw performance, and it didn't shift the price performance curve by much. And its RTX features sounded cool, but weren't widely supported at release. But over the course of that generation, ray tracing and DLSS quietly improved and gained traction and support, and it's safe to say that today have become extremely desirable features. For this reason alone, I expect the 3000 series to be seen as attractive cards to have, especially now they have the raw power to run ray tracing at high frame rates. As well as this, the 3000 series introduces more new features, but I don't think we'll see the benefit of them for a while. It's just good to know things like fast streaming and low latency are supported. But the 3000 series' key selling point is that they offer more performance for less money. I remember when every graphics generation was like this, and it's so nice to see it again. I've only been able to test the 3080. Yes, it's supposed to be a follow-up to the 2080, but I really think it's going to be compared more to the previous flagship, the 2080 Ti, which it manages to be considerably faster and cheaper than. Like I said, I've only tested the 3080, so it would be extremely unprofessional for me to speculate about the other cards this early on. The 3070 claims to deliver the same performance as last generation's flagship, but at less than half the price. Although it's the cheapest of the 3000 series that's been announced so far, at $500 it's still an expensive card, so I would expect more products to be released further down the stack, like the 3060, which historically has been the tier to deliver the best price-performance trade-off. And last is the 3090. It looks to be an absolute beast, but I think if anything is undermined by how good the 3080 looks, and for half the price. The 3090's 24GB of RAM makes it seem like it's intended for more than just gaming, and I would be surprised if a card didn't come out to bridge the gap between these two. But a lot of this depends on AMD's response. Their RDNA 2 cards will be revealed at the end of next month, and they've got a lot to do. It's no longer just about offering enough performance at an attractive price. It's testament to Nvidia's RTX efforts that AMD is facing so much pressure to deliver their own competing ray tracing and upscaling solutions. Even I'm not unprofessional enough to speculate about this right now, but I see the coming months as being the most exciting time the graphics card industry has had in a long time.